We investigate cases of the paranormal. They start in the realm of the unknown and end in the Black Vault. The ghoul is derived from the Arabic legend of a demonic being that inhabits deserted burial grounds. It is known to us as a loathsome creature who feeds on the rotting flesh of corpses. Is there a place where this disturbing legend and grim reality collide? And could it be right under our feet? Today's story concerns a pair of young podcasters with a morbid curiosity, a scandalous secret, and a gruesome truth that won't stay buried. Let's open the Black Vault and investigate. Peabody, Massachusetts, 2019. Off the main road that cuts through town and tucked away in the woods is the Sacred Hollow Cemetery. It's a lonely place, a New England relic, choked in overgrowth, rarely visited and mostly forgotten. But not entirely, not by those with an unquenchable thirst for the darker side of history. Enter Mikayla West and Jasper Kincaid, both 24. Two intrepid reporters with a nose for exploring the shadowy underbelly of everyday life. What started out as a hobby a few years ago for Mikayla and Jasper became a full-time occupation. As teens, they loved staying up late, watching horror films and true crime documentaries. For as long as they could remember, Mikayla and Jasper were intrinsically drawn to the darker side of human nature. Midnight Snack was the name of their popular podcast. It featured true stories of murder and monsters, delving deep into infamous cases and urban legends. They were both very excited about visiting Sacred Hill for tonight's podcast. It was a special episode on location where the murder supposedly happened. It was autumn and the night air was cool. Mikayla and Jasper didn't seem remotely frightened as they entered the grounds, dried leaves crunching under their feet. They lived for this, dark, uninhabited spaces hiding darker secrets. After all, cemeteries are quiet resting places for loved ones. There's nothing to fear here. The pair set up camp in an abandoned chapel at the far end of the cemetery. A full moon casts its light down on the grounds, creating the perfect atmosphere. This episode of Midnight Snack would be one to remember, they stated proudly to themselves. It wasn't just the atmosphere that provided the ideal backdrop for Midnight Snack, but the urban legend itself that Mikayla and Jasper were covering that evening. The horrifying tale of Oz Mackie. The Scourge of Peabody, a small-town serial killer and cannibal who preyed on the locals, men, women, children. Mackie didn't discriminate, which is why he had been so difficult to capture. From 1954 to 1957, the townspeople of Peabody lived in abject fear of the killer they dubbed the ghoul. What exactly happened that fateful night in October is sketchy, almost as if the details of the event were purposely hidden from the public. What is known is on Halloween night in 1957, Mackie was spotted and chased through the streets by an armed mob. He made his way to Sacred Hollow Cemetery, where he was cornered. The townspeople accosted Oz and tossed him into a freshly dug grave. They buried him alive. No judge, no jury, but in the minds of the townspeople, justice. They swore never to utter a word of their crime or speak of the ghoul. The rumor started shortly after. of a pale figure wandering the cemetery grounds at night, feeding in the shadows. Coffins would be found unearthed, flesh from the corpses chewed off, down to the bone. According to legend, Oz Mackie didn't suffocate to death that Halloween night. He dug tunnels under the graveyard using his bare hands, surviving on the flesh of interred bodies. And there, under the soil, in the darkness, transformed into something altogether different, something inhuman, something evil. It's this legend that piqued the interest of Mikayla and Jasper, so they decided to take their show to Peabody and the Sacred Hollow Cemetery. As intelligent, serious young people, naturally they didn't believe the legend was true, but it was an excellent topic for their podcast, and being on the grounds gave the morbid material some authenticity. So why did Mikayla feel like she was being watched the moment they entered the cemetery? Jasper felt it as well. There were no guards on the property, and the closest house was miles away. It was an unsettling feeling, eyes peering out of the darkness, watching their every move. Not allowing their imagination to get the best of them, Mikayla and Jasper continued to focus on preparing for their show. After all, it was their job to do the scaring. With a makeshift studio set up, they were ready to begin recording. Jasper was performing a sound check when he began to hear something strange in his headphones. Not chirping crickets or rustling leaves. He couldn't make out the bizarre sound at first, but listened intently. What was it? Chewing? Proving he had learned nothing from the hundreds of horror films he's seen, Jasper went alone to investigate. The cemetery was a confusing maze of headstones and dilapidated mausoleums. Jasper let his microphone lead the way as he moved through the eroded monuments. Following the bizarre sound was difficult, as it seemed to echo all around him. The sound grew louder as Jasper approached an open grave. He thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but something shifted in the moonlight. A flash of movement inside the deep hole. A look of fear crossed his face. Jasper lifted his cell phone to take a picture and inched closer. Mikayla's concern began to grow when Jasper didn't return or answer her repeated calls. Something had to be wrong, so she decided to go out after him. Maybe he got turned around and was lost, something that could easily happen in an old cemetery like this one. Mikayla made her way up and down the twisted paths, her flashlight lighting the way. For a person with a foot firmly planted in the world of horror, this was getting all too real. What started out as an exciting adventure turned into a sickening feeling in the pit of Mikayla's stomach. She stumbled across the open grave. Sitting on the ground at her feet was Jasper's headphones and cell phone. Mikayla's fear bubbled up inside her. This was no longer the result of an active imagination. Her partner in crime would never abandon his gear in the dirt. Mikayla picked up Jasper's phone and switched it on. Her eyes widened with fright upon seeing the last image he had taken. A violent attack. A glimpse of something pale and monstrous. That's when she heard Jasper's distant, muffled scream, somewhere in the graveyard, echoing through the rows of weathered tombstones. Mikayla raced through the eroding maze, chasing the sound of her friend's panicked howls. She stopped dead at a mausoleum and cautiously inched closer to it, whispering Jasper's name. His hand reached out of the gloomy crypt, grasping at Mikayla through the bars. "Run," he roared at her. "Run for your life." Before she could set Jasper free, she caught a glimpse of something perched atop the mausoleum. A pale, skeletal figure glaring down at her with large, wild eyes and wet, sharp fangs that glistened in the moonlight. Mikayla gasped, shuddering with terror, before stumbling backwards and running. She bolted through the stone jungle with no sense of direction, no idea if she was racing towards the entrance of the cemetery or away from it. The soil collapsed under Mikayla, causing her legs to buckle. She dropped down into the dark as a small hole opened up under her feet. Mikayla hit the ground hard, crumpling into a heap. The wind had been knocked out of her. As she regained her senses, Mikayla was instantly hit by the stale air and smell of root rot, and something else, something dead and decaying. She scrambled for the flashlight and switched it on. It was a tunnel about 5 feet high. The earthen walls were a tangle of twisted roots and mulch, and there were bones everywhere. Mikayla crawled fast, lighting the narrow tunnel in front of her. Where does it lead? Once again, she barreled forward, hoping and praying she'll come across a way out. The tunnel opened up to a wider chamber. Mikayla spun around with her flashlight. It was a network of tunnels, branching out in all directions. Could one of these tunnels lead to the exit? It could take hours to try them all, maybe even days. Without warning, the pale creature lunged out of the dark behind Mikayla, cracking her across the head with a chunk of stone. Her vision blurred before everything went black. Mikayla regained consciousness. She was laying on her back, her wrists and ankles tightly bound by rope. The smell of the soil and rotten wood surrounded her. Mikayla was lying in an old coffin. She struggled to free her hands, but to no avail. A figure appeared above her, its gaunt, crooked shape lit by the moonlight. Mikayla knew what this thing was, although she grappled with the reality of it. It was Oz Mackie. At least, it used to be, before it stopped being human. Mikayla had done her research. "You can't eat me," Mikayla pleaded. "I'm not dead." The creature gripped the lid of the coffin and licked his lips. "For later, then," he hissed, before closing the lid shut. Her cries would go unheard because no one visits Secret Hollow anymore, for good reason. Mikayla and Jasper promised their followers an extra special episode of Midnight Snack, but it never came. The podcast had gone dark. In fact, the program's hosts seemed to have disappeared as well. No one knows exactly what happened to Mikayla West and Jasper Kincaid, but there are plenty of true crime podcasts exploring their untimely disappearance. Midnight Snack set out to prove there's always a kernel of truth to urban legends. Mikayla and Jasper discovered that truth the hard way, and, in the process, became urban legends themselves. Apparently, irony was on the menu. Join me next time for another mysterious case of the paranormal that emerged from the depths of the unknown and currently resides in the Black Vault.